They don't know what they're getting blessed with right now. How you are looking at product metrics and combining those with evals.
So I think that there's no real difference between product metrics and evals, or at least like the best evals are the same as product metrics. What do I mean by that?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of what you're trying to solve with evals is you're trying to get a measure of the quality of your AI system. And what's changed with generative AI and large language models is a lot more of the use cases are very subjective to measure performance on. If you are like writing an email or summarizing a document or answering a question, there isn't like one right answer anymore. And so it's hard to say like what even is the correct answer. Like take a concrete example of summarization. Meeting summarization is so contextual as to whether or not it's a good summary. If you have a sales call, you want a different type of summary. Different salespeople will care about different things, like did you pick up key information? So there's no one correct answer anymore. So in some sense, like the best eval, like the eval you wish you could have in practice, would be the end user outcome. Like did the user get the outcome that they wanted? Were they able to achieve their goal? Did they use the text? Did they like it? Did they, depending on the use case, did the agent achieve the goal it was supposed to do for the person in the way that they expected?
Yeah.
Was the customer support message actually helpful?
Yeah.
And what evals are really trying to do is give you a proxy for that during development, because you can't have that necessarily before you put stuff into production. And so hopefully those two things are very correlated, and product metrics and evals are not that different. And a lot of the evals that people are creating with LLM as judge or like automated evals are often run as production metrics as well, right? So on every utterance, they're actually scoring it with either a classifier or a piece of code or an LLM as judge, and then monitoring that for how things are drifting over time or to be alerted if something changes.
And do you see this as like the happy path in whatever the product is? There's a next step that I'm trying to take. And if that gets accomplished after I have some interaction with AI, then that's a win. And you can easily see that's black and white. Like I took that step, I made the next best action, or I didn't.
Yeah, so in practice, we see like three very common types of sort of like in production evals as like default end user metrics, and then ones that are more bespoke or kind of use case specific. So the most like basic ones that everyone does, you see them in lots of apps. So like the simplest thing is just end user feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down, or
Yeah.
scores, things like that. They're somewhat useful. You don't actually get as much of it as you would want, and it biases towards the extremes.
I always laugh at those because it's like the people that are given the thumbs up and thumbs down are just a very small subset of your user base.
But it's still useful data, right? So something we'll often see people do in Humanloop is like look at the examples that got a bad rating, because they want to try and understand like really where are the failure modes, like where is the system going wrong. Then you get corrections. So if people are like generating text or getting an answer to something, they're editing a legal document or something like that and being given suggested edits, then they probably like edit the text before they use it a little bit. And so having that like correction can be very useful signal, both like how much did they correct it, but also as a stored data point of what the right answer was in that case. And then finally what you said of like actions. So like what is the natural next action? And does the user take that? Do they send the message? Do they copy the text? Whatever it is contextually in your application. Those we see people use a lot as baseline. And then things that we see on top are people will often build custom LLM as judge or code evaluators that are very use case specific. And those might be monitoring tone of voice, whether or not there's, stuff is on brand or stuff like this that may be a little bit more subjective to monitor. And they might want that only in development, or they might not want that in development and in production as well.
Yeah, because when you get into the enterprise, they can't just YOLO things into production. Like
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? So when we built the first version of Humanloop, like the initial focus was all around helping people to measure how well the system was working in production and use that to guide improvements. And that's still a core piece of the platform. But as we went up market and we started to sell more to mid-market and enterprise companies, then yeah, you had this problem that like you have to be able to be confident that it works well in development before you're willing to, roll it out even to a beta group or to all your users.
Yeah.
And so you need some way of actually building a rigorous set of testing metrics in dev that hopefully are predictive of what will happen when you actually deploy to production.
So basically, you went into Humanloop with that idea, and I like that you talk about the evolution, and you also see how things changed. I talked to you what, like 3, 4 years ago when Humanloop was
It was
starting.
just over 2 years ago. Yeah. So it
Okay,
was
so
about it was just a couple of months before ChatGPT came out.
yeah,
Actually, as I think we recorded that episode.
classic,
Um,
great timing, and
yeah, that is roughly how I split the world now, before and
yeah.
after ChatGPT. Um,
Some people it's Christ, others
exactly.
it's ChatGPT.
Yeah, BC. It was
Yeah.
it was about 3 months BC.
Yeah. So, what have you changed? How have you like seen the product develop and grow, and your thinking around AI in production in general?
Yeah. So, when we started, LLMs were still very new. They're mostly being used just by startups.
Hmm.
The applications were much more limited. So people were building like these single prompt-based apps. It was, the early use cases were copywriting or various forms of writing assistant. User comes to the website, describes what they want, spits out a blog post, or helps them, brainstorm. Um, and the models were kind of just about good enough for that. But for more complicated use cases like question answering or agents, people were trying and building demos. And even
Yeah.
2.5 years ago, like, you had the first agent demos, but the models weren't smart enough to make that reliable.
Hmm.
And so the first version of Humanloop was really focused on helping people who were building, this first generation of LLM applications to understand how well they were working in production. Because if you can't measure it, it's very difficult to improve it, know how to make it better over time. And subjectivity and stochasticity was like the challenge, right? And it's still the challenge. But if you think about copywriting or writing assistants, that's an extreme point of, like, evaluation is very subjective.
Yeah.
And for a lot of engineers, it was the first time that they were building software where every time you run it, you get different results, right? People in the machine learning community, this is relatively normal for them. But I think that if you are not from a machine learning background, then that was actually quite a new experience. Um, and so the first version of Humanloop was very simple. It allowed you to monitor what was happening in production. So basically, every time someone was interacting with your system, to get the inputs and the outputs, gather end user feedback, and match that against different prompts. So you could kind of do A/B testing or comparisons of prompts in production.
Hmm.
Um, what's changed since then is, as the models have gotten smarter, the complexity of the use cases has gone up
Of
enormously.
course.
So
Yeah.
we've gone from like simple writing apps to people are automatically negotiating legal contracts, right? So people like Filevine and Entra are our customers, or we've got people building language learning assistants at Duolingo,
Uh-huh.
or at Gusto they're building complex agents that can actually go in and do tasks that accountants were previously doing in payroll software.
Mm.
So we've gone a long way from, hey, just generate me a blog, to actually go do something complicated
Yeah.
for me.
Multi-step,
Yeah.
super
And so
complex. Yeah.
we've had to build out, still the same, the fundamental problem is the same, which is that I'm trying to take this unreliable base thing, the LLM, and build a reliable, trustworthy application on top of it. But the stakes have gone up, right? As we started to work with enterprises, they care a lot more about avoiding mistakes, about having guardrails in place. The complexity of the applications have gone up. So tracing and observability actually becomes way more important. The way that people build has changed as well. So original Humanloop was just this in production gathering feedback. Since then, we built that out into a full tracing and observability system. So if you have an agent that's going off and doing things, it'll let you see the full path of what did that system do. Like, so user asked the question, then every turn of the conversation or every step that the agent takes, you have that recorded, and you
Hmm.
can augment that with feedback or evaluation data. So you have this very rich data set
Nice.
that allows you to do both governance, but also improve your system. Like, what is and isn't working, and how do I guide that?
Yeah.
And then coupled to that, I think what's become the core of the application actually is an Evals tool. And this is really used primarily in development. But what it allows people to do is to write down essentially the criteria that the system needs to pass to be good,
Mm.
and have a data set of test cases that they can then iterate against. So LLM development is very iterative. You build the first version of the pipeline as quickly as possible, get something that works end to
Yeah.
end. And then you're looking to go from something that works end to end to something that's good enough to trust in production.
Yep.
And you're iterating over prompts, you're iterating over tool definitions, over pre-processing and post-processing code. You're trying out different models. You're trying out different the data sources for the context. If you don't have a way to know as you make those changes, am I making things better or worse? Then it's very difficult to actually make progress and not just spin your wheels. And
Yeah.
so what evals do is they allow you to get quantitative feedback on every change that you make, so that you can actually tell, like, am I improving things? And that's really helpful during development to actually get to a system that works well. And I think we spoke alongside Filevine at like recent AI Ops conference that you guys had organized. And they were able to take a system, of just over 50% accuracy on doing information extraction to 90% plus. But it would have been impossible without this constant feedback loop.
Yeah,
So
those evals were the most important thing, huh?
yeah,
It's
at
like,
least for them.
yeah,
And I think it's one part amongst many, but it's kind of an essential baseline. Like if you don't have good evals, I don't think you're
can't
going to
get
be
far.
able to get very far on the other pieces. So it's foundational.
Stay with me here.
Yeah,
Have you heard the parable of the scorpion and the frog?
I
Like,
have, but
you
maybe we
know,
should maybe we should remind
yeah,
the
all right, all
audience.
right. So there's this parable of a scorpion and a frog, and the scorpion's trying to get across the river. And so it sees a frog and it says, "Hey, will you give me a lift? I need to get across the river. So can you take me?" And the frog is like, "Yeah, but you're a scorpion and you got a tail, and if you sting me, then I'm gonna drown and I'm gonna die." And the scorpion said, "Don't be ridiculous. Why would I sting you if I'm on your back and then you drowned and I also drowned?" And so the frog thinks about it for a sec and goes, "Oh, okay, I'll buy into that one. Yeah, get on." And so the frog's taking the scorpion across the river. And the scorpion can't help itself. It just, boom, at a certain point, it stings the frog and they both go down and they drown. And the
And
reason I'm saying this
and as they're
parable,
drowning, the frog says to the
oh, yeah.
scorpion, "Why did you sting me?"
Yeah.
And he says, "It's just in my nature."
That's it. That's the key part. Yeah, it's in my nature, right? And the reason I think about that story is because a lot of times I wonder if these LLMs, we're caging them and trying to put all of these guardrails around them and all of this different stuff. We're doing all this wild engineering, like evals and like everything that we can muster up, when these hallucinations are just part of the nature of the LLM, and we don't like them, but we have to figure out a way to like contain them.
Yeah, so I feel like there's maybe multiple things going on here, and there's a few things to talk about. Let's put a pin in the hallucination question. I really want to come back to
Yeah.
that. But I think there's an extent to which sometimes what people are doing is working around the limitations in the current generation of models, right? So some of what people are doing is, oh, the system is like not reliable enough, or the models aren't smart enough, so we have to figure out a way around that. And that's a stopgap solution. But I think even if you had the model to be arbitrarily smart, like let's say you just have an API to Einstein or whatever Dario says his data center of genius is, I don't think the need to like try and iterate on your system to achieve your goal goes away. You still have to figure out like what is the context the model needs to be able to do this goal. Is it doing the goal in the way that I expect? If I change things over time, is that still true? So, OpenAI releases a new model, and I want to try it out. Like, what is the impact of that change on my metrics? Like, maybe the accuracy of a system goes up, but people don't like the tone of voice as much, or something like this.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about mitigating limitations of the system so much as like even if you have the smartest model in the world, it's always going to be stochastic, right? Like by nature of these systems, and we're not trying to get rid of that stochasticity. That's often a benefit, and it's always going to have like slightly different characters with the models, because I think sort of sticking to lines from Dario, since I think he has some good lines. He says we don't so much build these systems as grow them. There's a certain unpredictability in the character of different models. And that's a feature, not a bug, because it means we get lots of different personalities or styles or skills or variances in ability that I think people like and can make use of. I don't think that takes away the need for evaluation. If you're a software engineer, you're writing unit tests, you're writing integration tests, like why would it be any different with AI? It's just that the types of tests you need to write are different. And in fact, if you come from a machine learning background, like you were always building a test set of cases and measuring metrics on them. It's just that the types of metrics and how you do it are changing.
Yeah.
And then on the point of hallucination, when I speak to people about this colloquially, I find it very hard to get out of people like a coherent definition of what they mean by hallucination, as opposed to just the model being wrong. Like when you talk about hallucination, you're implying an intent to the model. And so like most people, I don't think, have a clear idea in their head of the distinction between those two things. Like maybe academics have defined a good distinction, but when people say the model hallucinated when it answered a question, what's the difference between that and it just got the answer wrong?
Yeah. I guess a hallucination is the wrong answer at the end of the day. So it makes sense that they're one and the same, but the idea there then is mitigating the wrong answers, not mitigating the hallucinations in a way. It's like, let's just figure out how to be more consistent with right answers. And we can do that by, like what you're saying, having this overview of how the system is changing over time.
I feel like when people use the word hallucination, it implies something about their mental model of like what the LLM is doing. And I'm not sure exactly what that mental model is that they're thinking of, but it feels at least conceptually muddy to me.
Yeah.
Like I don't think people are clear on what they mean. And I think it would just be clearer to say like the LLM is being factually
Yeah.
inaccurate.
It's getting things wrong.
Yeah.
I like that. On the inside of what you've built, you've got this system running, right? And you're recognizing that there's changes that are happening to the system continuously.
hmm
But then there's the production environment and there's logs and traces that are
Yeah.
coming back. And it goes to these product metrics. Like you're getting product metrics back, you're getting information back. So how are you using that to update your system? And how are you making it easy for that loop to just continuously be happening and ideally like get better each time?
Yeah. So maybe this is a good point for me to kind of explain the different pillars of what's in Humanloop.
Yeah.
Because I think understanding like what we've put into the LM Evals platform and why we chose those pillars kind of answers this question. So there's like really three core pillars. We've talked about two of them. So one is the in production tracing and observability. The other is like having data sets and evaluators that you can run during development. And then the final pillar that we haven't talked about, but is kind of the answer to this question, is tools for managing prompts, iterating on them, collaborating between the technical people and the non-technical people who have the domain knowledge, maybe to be able to change a prompt or to like look at an output and sort of score it in some way. So some concrete examples here would be, we mentioned Filevine earlier. At Filevine, it's like lawyers who are doing a lot of the prompt engineering. At Duolingo, it's like language learning experts. At Fundrise, they have their kind of real estate experts and product managers be involved in writing the prompt. So at a lot of our companies, the people who are either looking at the evals and scoring them, at Gusto, it's customer support staff, or the people who are writing prompts are not the engineers themselves. And so part of the platform as well is separating out the configuration, which is the prompts and the tool definitions from the code, so that you can iterate on the prompts independently, but still have them versioned and tracked in the way that you would have with traditional software. So those are the components. And then now we can kind of answer a question of like, okay, well, I'm monitoring all of this stuff in production. How do I actually use that to make things better? And usually the cycle is that someone will be looking at an eval or they'll be looking at logs from production, and they'll have some hypothesis about why the system isn't working the way it's supposed to be working or something that's wrong. Like, so they'll spot inaccuracy in a RAG system, or they'll spot the tone of voice is wrong or something like that. And they'll
This person is usually technical, non-technical.
We actually see it with both. So it's often PMs. So PMs sort of bridge that gap, or it might be the engineers themselves looking at the eval logs. They will then say, okay, I think what's going on is that the model's not getting the context it needs, right? My guess is that the problem is that actually the RAG system is like not retrieving enough. We should go and like improve the recall of the RAG system. Well, they can then go make that change within Humanloop, right? They can actually update the configuration of the tool, or they can go and change a prompt, or they can trigger a fine tune of a model, and then they can run the eval and see like, did I actually make things better on my metrics or not? And then there's an ability to deploy that change from there. And so for a lot of the changes you might be wanting to make, which are changes to prompts, tool definitions, or trying to run some kind of fine tuning job, you can often do that without having to go into code. And so that allows the non-technical people to iterate very quickly and frees the engineers to do their thing as what they want to do from the PMs and the non-technical domain experts. And something we see a lot otherwise is a PM wants to make a change to a prompt or wants to try something, and that might involve a full app redeployment. Maybe they have to open a ticket in a system like Jira or Linear to be like, please update this prompt. then an engineer will go like edit that in code,
Sounds
then they'll do the
painful.
app redeployment.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, actually that didn't make the change I was expecting. Or if they don't have good evals in place, then people are nervous to make changes because they're worried about regressions.
I like how you're bridging the gap between all these different personas, so it's as technical as you want to be, or as subject matter expert
Yeah,
as you want to
there's really
be.
three personas that we interact with a lot, and maybe this goes as well to like what we've seen the most successful teams do when they're building
Oh,
products.
yeah.
And so you have your,
Nice segue, by the way.
you have your product engineers or the actual software engineers who are building the system. They're making the API calls to the LLMs. They're actually building all the pipelines.
Yeah.
But oftentimes they're not the right people to be able to define what good looks like, and they're not necessarily the right people to write the prompts. And the people who are usually best at that are the product managers. Writing a spec is not that different to writing evals. Actually, like there's some definition of what does good look like, and oftentimes there might be a third persona that may or may not be the PM themselves, which is the person who has the domain expertise to kind of define what the goal is and what good looks like.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's just a product manager, but sometimes it's a separate person.
And that's where the lawyer comes in and says, "Wait a minute,
Yeah.
you think this is okay?"
And so the way those people get used is either they're being used just to provide feedback. So sometimes what people will do is, as part of the eval loop, they'll map the system over a data set of test cases. They'll have the lawyer or the domain expert, whatever the use case is, come in, look at each output and score it as like pass, fail with a critique. So, hey, this one is good. It's fine. This one was bad because. And then that binary data of like which ones were good enough and the reasons then become what informs the next round of either prompt engineering or updates. And sometimes the lawyer will go do the prompt engineering themselves. Sometimes the engineers or PMs will do it. But that feedback cycle is really useful. And it's often also what gets used to build the LLMs as judge.
Yeah.
So, that human feedback is invaluable, but very expensive and hard to scale.
Yeah.
And oftentimes what you can do is take this combination of pass, fail, feedback, and critiques, and then essentially kind of distill that into a prompted LLM that you can now use at scale. And as long as it correlates highly with the human judgment, you've now got a way to do more scalable evaluation that can also be done in production.
So evals are being done primarily by folks that are PMs. People talk about how data scientists can fill that role really well to create these evals, to also help explore in the prompt exploration space. And it's very akin to what a data scientist is used to doing.
It's very helpful to have someone on the team who has a background in stats or machine learning or data science, just for the rigor of understanding like how to do evaluation well, like understands the distinction between sort of held out data versus not held out data, and what kind of metrics you might want to calculate, and that if you're dealing with stochastic systems, you probably want to run them multiple times and get averages and stuff that will be like obvious and intuitive to anyone from a stats background, but someone who's like not done that style of thinking might not even know to think about that. And so the typical makeup that we see is usually there's like, the normal number of engineers you would have on any product team, maybe one data scientist, and then the PMs and the domain experts, and they're collaborating together, right? So each of those people is bringing something to the table. The data scientists usually don't have the relevant domain knowledge to be good at doing the prompt iteration. And so what you really want is to be able to give them tools that allow the non-technical people to come in and iterate without being blocked by either of these other groups, and they can share information between them. The way this works in Humanloop is that when you want to run an evaluation, you map your application or your LLM system over a data set, it generates all the outputs, and then it scores them. And one of the ways it can score them is with human feedback. So it creates a queue of jobs for the domain experts to come in and actually provide that feedback.
Nice. And then do you also map it to the product metrics?
So not during development, but during production, what happens is that people add some logging calls, or we have integrations with OpenTelemetry so they can send data to Humanloop of what is the agent doing. And then once those traces land on Humanloop, people can set up evaluators to be in monitoring mode. And so what that means is that every time a trace comes through, the evaluator, say it's an LLM as judge evaluator, will look at the output, score it, and basically you're building this data set of traces augmented with product metrics or augmented with end user feedback. And so when a PM comes into the app, a typical workflow might be, okay, show me the cases where the LLM thought this was bad, or show me the cases where a user gave me bad feedback. I'm going to look at those and try and determine whether I need to go change a prompt or fine tune a
Yeah.
model or update my RAG system. I'm going to use that to guide where my failures are.
And now you said that you can update the RAG system from within Humanloop.
So there's some amount of that people can do within Humanloop, and some that might require busting out into more powerful tools.
Uh-huh.
Um, so within Humanloop, people are often specifying configuration. So they're specifying chunk sizes, like what metrics being used to like actually do the retrieval, whether it's like a
Uh-huh.
traditional IR method or they're doing something with like semantic similarity. So they have a tool definition within Humanloop that's high level configuration for the retriever, and they can edit that. And the way it works is we're kind of like a CMS for prompt and tool definitions. So
Hmm.
in production, the way it works is a production application basically speaks to Humanloop and says, hey, what's the prompt that's currently deployed? Or what's the tool configuration that's currently deployed? Humanloop sends that back, and then the retriever gets called, or it gets cached locally, and
Uh-huh.
then the retriever gets called. So you're managing the configuration, which is the
Yeah.
prompt and tool definitions from within Humanloop. And that allows you to iterate quickly and make changes very fast on the application.
And so that configuration, how are you tracking it over time or tracking changes? Is it just in GitHub?
So we have sort of a version control system built into Humanloop
Uh-huh.
that tracks it. And then we also have serialized versions of all of these. We call them files. So every
Uh-huh.
tool and prompt in Humanloop has its file type. And there's a .prompt file format or a .tool file format that people also check into Git. So people can have
And
like a sync with Git if they want and still be using Git for versioning. But we're also keeping track of the history of changes. We've got audit logs. You can see who changed what on Humanloop natively. So if people are doing it through the UI as a non-technical person, you have the same rigor as you would have if an engineer was committing code.
let's say I update a prompt or I start seeing something is going a little bit weird, and so then I'm going to change out a model. What is the CI/CD process?
So typically the workflow would be someone goes into Humanloop, they would make the change in our editor, save a version of that prompt, and they'd trigger an evaluation.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes these evals are actually triggered as part of like just typical CI/CD. So
Yeah.
someone is running CI/CD, and a GitHub action is going to call Humanloop to run the eval report,
Uh,
and then they get back the metrics and the diff from, so they can set thresholds on like we have to be above certain metrics before something's going to be committed to prod,
yeah.
and then it goes to
Nice.
prod. So it's actually like very much just the normal CI/CD
Yeah.
people are used to. The only difference is that one of the GitHub actions or one of the hooks in your CI/CD system will be calling an eval report on Humanloop for that change.
Okay. What have you been seeing as far as use cases and actual like AI that is making people money? It's always easy and fun to talk about all these evals and everything that you can be doing, but at the end of the day, if you're not looking at what the real potential is or
Yeah,
what
where's
the
the where's the
real
business where's the business
yeah, what
impact?
the real use cases are, and so how have you been seeing folks succeed in this department?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see more customer-facing use cases. So there's kind of two buckets where I think people are either saving money or making money with
Yeah.
with Gen AI. So there's like internal process, automation. People are building customer service support agents, right? Whereas
Yeah.
previously, before they might have had humans take a certain amount of time, they can improve their deflection rates or increase the success with things like customer support. That's like a very obvious use case that at scale I know is saving companies tens of millions of dollars. And
Yeah.
I can't name names, but like at least one company I know is saving on the order of $30 million a year
Wow.
from what they had before.
Not
Um,
bad.
but then what we spend a lot more time on is customer facing applications. So less internal process automation. And the reason why we naturally end up spending time on that or our customers are building that is in an internal app, people will tolerate a certain amount of bugginess or kind of it doesn't need to be 100% accurate. But
Uh-huh.
as soon as you're putting something in front of customers, then reliability and like confidence that it's going to perform the way you expect goes up way higher.
Yeah.
And the need for evals and tracing and observability becomes an essential thing. So we mentioned earlier Filevine, which is a legal tech company, and the reason I'll talk about them is because we had a case study together
Yeah.
that that's also shared
Shout out
on.
to Brianna.
Shout out to Brianna from Filevine. But they've released something like 6 new AI products in their contract sort of lifecycle management product and tools for lawyers across the last year and a half that are generating, I think, tens of millions of dollars of revenue for them, net new revenue, and growing very quickly. So
Wow.
legal tech is like one like vertical that and there are other companies, Harvey,
Yeah.
Entra, that are like doing Ironclad, that are doing amazing things with LLMs in the legal space. So those are applications that I think are generating significant revenue. Coding tools is like a vertical where we know there's a lot of revenue being generated.
Yeah.
Cursor, Windsurf. Now you've got Claude Code from Anthropic natively. Like OpenAI has their own tools. GitHub Copilot was the OG, right? So that's another set of vertical applications that we know people are getting a ton of value from.
Can we pause right there
Yeah.
for GitHub Copilot? Because talk about opening up a whole market and then just losing it. It's so incredible how much work they did to create this whole new field and then let Cursor come and eat their lunch.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we'll see how. I think the game is still very early. Like I think it's too early to call how it will play out. There's not that much differentiation even now between these different coding tools. Developers are very fickle. They swap models and they swap which tool they're using very quickly.
True.
So I wouldn't call it yet.
Yeah. But yeah, it's GitHub Copilot, I feel like it's true that you never know. It could come out of nowhere or rise like the phoenix from the ashes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see what the model providers themselves start to produce.
Well, there was talks about Windsurf being bought by
There's rumors that OpenAI is going to buy Windsurf.
or it already bought them. Who knows?
And then you've got Claude Code, you've got OpenAI's Codex, so they're already releasing their own tools. So they're very clearly entering the game of competing directly on coding tools.
Yeah, and Copilot has some kind of partnership that I saw with one of the. I think it might be Anthropic.
Oh, interesting, because so early on they had a very close co-partnership with Microsoft because of the Microsoft OpenAI relationship, and the early GitHub Copilot models were the early Codex models from OpenAI, sort of chucked over the wall,
All right, so continue. I cut you off. There's
But yeah,
coding
so in terms of
agents,
vertical applications, like legal tech is definitely a domain where people are making a ton of money. Coding is one where people are making a ton of money. Another pocket that we see is ed tech. So we have a bunch of companies who are building tools for teachers or for students or AI tutoring. So one of our customers there is Macmillan, who are building an AI tutor, but Duolingo for kind of language learning.
Love Duolingo.
And a bunch of
Does not
others.
Help. If you've ever tried to, you think you've got like a level 7 or level 10, and then you go to the country and you're like, yo, hablo español. Tu hablas español.
But I think that's going to get a lot better with improved AI tools,
I hope
right?
so.
You can actually practice conversations.
Exactly. Because I need to learn German. I've been living in Germany for too long to not be able to speak German.
But you don't speak German?
Yeah, exactly.
I always assumed that because you were in Germany, that you were German.
I was Deutsch. No, I am very not Deutsch. And it's starting to show. Now my daughter's 6, and she speaks German incredibly. And so I'm missing out on a lot of half the conversation because she'll speak to my wife in German. And then, so Duolingo, I'm going to start using it again and see if
you can get fluent at German.
And because of Humanloop, I'm going to say, Raza, you saved me. Now you're the reason I speak German.
I don't know if we can take too much credit. I think the good folks at these companies are doing the hard work.
Yeah.
But we're hopefully facilitating. So yeah, those are, I think, 3 concrete examples. I could probably name more from some. I think those are like still applications that are maybe like one generation back from the state of the art, in the sense that there's been a progression of complexity of things that people are building with LLMs. From right at the beginning, everyone was building these like writing assistants, kind of very, the only thing that really had traction in the beginning was like marketing automation.
Copy AI.
Yeah.
Was that the one in
the Jarvis?
That was the one. They raised a ton of money.
There was a ton of money.
Oh,
I don't know what's happened to them
and then,
since then.
well, OpenAI, when ChatGPT came out, it was like, oh, we don't need copy AI anymore.
But interesting, some of these companies have managed to keep reinventing themselves. Like Writer, I think, is doing really well. Yeah. And they started off in a very similar vein. But what they did differently was that they were always focused on private models rather than building on top of the large public LLMs. So they seem to be going fine. But yes, you had kind of copywriting. And then I think you started to get like RAG systems and people realizing, hey, we can actually use this for customer support or for, factual question answering in various ways. And we're only now seeing like more agentic applications really get deployed. And I think the first version of agents is still very much like the skeuomorphic. I'm going to go do what I used to do with a human, with an agent. But we're starting to see some of our customers build things that go one step further and are imagining things that like wouldn't have been possible before LLMs.
Oh, interesting.
So they're still agentic applications, but they're not, I'm going to go replace a human. I'm going to go do something that couldn't be done before. And a concrete example of this, one of our customers is a company called Windmill. And the problem they're solving is that performance management in large companies sucks. You get a review from a customer, like sorry, not a review from a customer. You get like feedback from your manager
Yeah,
in like a
manager.
cycle, like once every 6 months. The manager doesn't really understand like what's going on. It's not a great experience. But what you can do if you have an army of like LLM agents is they can go out and they can speak to everyone in your company all the time. They can
Uh-huh.
proactively ask them questions. They know whose colleagues are, and they can then aggregate that information back up and share it in both directions. The managers can have a much better idea of like on the ground what's happening, and also you can get like real time or continuous feedback from both your peers and your manager on how you're doing,
Wow.
mediated by these LMs that can effectively have conversations with everyone. And it's still very early, but that's an example of like an application that I think wouldn't have been possible. You couldn't sort of imagine doing that before LLM. So I'm quite
Yeah.
excited about people pushing agents in that direction.
That's a fun thread to pull on because you can go in the direction of now that we have the ability to talk to people at scale,
Yeah,
what can we do?
yeah, absolutely.
I imagine they're talking to people in various formats. It's maybe that you get on a call and there's
I think in
a
this
voice
cases it's in
agent.
Slack, but you could imagine it being a
Yeah.
voice agent. You could, and it'll just send you a Slack message with a few
Yeah.
questions, and or it'll say, hey, we spoke to the colleagues who work most closely with you, and they think you're doing a great job. But here's what you're doing well. But we got this theme that came up across 4 different people where you might want to improve,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and that wouldn't have been possible before.
I take feedback horribly, so I would not like that tool at all.
Yeah, I think you can imagine like more pro-human, pro-social, and less pro-social versions. I think this is actually taking a very productive approach and
Yeah.
just really trying to help people communicate better.
Yeah, it reminds me of this idea that a friend of the pod, Fausto, had. And he was saying, what about when everyone joins the community, they get on a call with an avatar and they're asking questions, the avatar's asking you
Mm.
questions on why are you joining this community? What is interesting for you? Are you looking for a job? Are you looking just to learn more? Are you looking for other people in the field? Because we kind of know the buckets that people will fall into when they join the community. And it's one of like these 7 things. And so,
To what extent can you not do that just with a sort of form when they sign
because
up?
people don't fill out forms,
People
that's
don't
the
fill out the
problem.
form. Okay.
9 out of 10 people just go, yeah, fuck that. And like, I'm not going to take 5 minutes and fill this out, even though if they did and we knew more information and we knew, like, wow, 5 out of 10 people who join are looking to meet others in the field. We have this program where we set people up one-on-one matching program with other people in the community, and so we can suggest that to them and make sure that they know that we have this program.
Mm.
But if you never get the data, you don't know, and so I can suggest it, but maybe 5 out of 10 times it falls flat.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is interesting that you can do with this tech that you couldn't do with just a form is ask follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And ask follow-up questions that are specific, based, adaptive
Yeah.
forms. I don't
That's
think
so
was
true.
possible before.
So again, it goes back to being able to talk to people in a much deeper way at scale.
Yeah, but building those systems, like there's so much added complexity, right?
Mm.
So the windmill PMs are kind of like iterating on, they've got tens or maybe more prompts at this stage, like hundreds of versions of those. Like each of those needs to be benchmarked. It's a complicated system. And being able to separate out, like iterating on the prompts from having that in your code base, where they might be scattered all over,
Oof.
is a very big win.
I do appreciate that you extract it out of the code base so you're not going through lines and lines of codes or just like searching for that one prompt.
You want to have a very clear picture of exactly what context are you sending to the model. So this is one of the beefs I also have with like a lot of the LLM frameworks, like agent frameworks or things like that, where I won't name any specific names, but people will know if they're using them. They all do this to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Um,
Many of people have already talked about this on the internet.
but oftentimes they're hard coding prompts within the framework. And so you as the end user don't have a clear view of exactly what am I sending the model. Prompt engineering and building with LLMs is not complicated. Like all you need to really understand is like exactly what context did the model receive,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can reason about whether or not it's possible for the model to answer or achieve the task. And then what things do I need to change or give it more information on for it to be able to either adjust the tone or get closer to reliability, like edge cases I might not have thought of, much like communicating with a colleague.
Yeah.
But if there's a bunch of like hidden stuff that the model's also being
Yeah.
told,
All this random body language.
so I think like just making it really easy for people to see like exactly what is the context that's going to the model, which is the tracing and observability, and also having the prompts separated and centralized so that you don't have them scattered around the code base.
How often are you seeing folks use variables in their prompts?
Oh, like all the time.
That's a common pattern now, right?
Yeah, so like we talk about prompt template. So when we talk about prompts in Humanloop, we really mean the choice of the model, the hyperparameters, and then the prompt template, where that template is going to have, in production, variables that are coming either from user feedback or they're going to be being filled in from a retrieval system. So you have a template with gaps. People use maybe like mustache style sort of handles or Jinja templating or something like this to specify the prompt template.
Because it brings up the other piece that we were talking about earlier on the recommender systems.
Yeah, so the context here was we were saying that the closest analogy to building with sort of very subjective use cases before LLMs was probably recommender systems.
Yep.
A lot of machine learning has correct answers, but recommender systems don't. Like, what is the best movie to recommend or clothing item to recommend? There's not one correct answer, and in that way, it's very analogous to building LM systems where it's subjective as to what good is.
Then you were saying, well, now when I want to go for a movie, I look at.
I 100% go to ChatGPT now.
Yeah,
I know.
And I think you're an outlier.
I probably am.
We'll ask the chat and we'll see what people say. Like listeners can let us know.
But if you're not doing this, you should be. So let me make my pitch quickly,
Right.
which is just that if you're a heavy user of one of these LLM systems, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it might be, like it's learning a lot about you. It knows a lot about your preferences through the memory now. It also like you can describe to it what you want in a way that like is very hard to do with like a traditional Rexis system that just says like how similar are you to these other people. So, you can do weird things. You can be like, hey, I'm in the mood for a political thriller that's like slightly dark.
In the style of Guy Ritchie.
Yeah, in the style of Guy Ritchie. I recently watched a movie that I really liked, and I'm like, I'm in the mood for something similar. Like, what else is out there that's like this? Or I really like Christopher Nolan's films. Like, which other directors also play on themes of time travel or whatever it might be? You can't get that from a Rexis system.
No. Yeah, I was thinking like, oh, here's the last 5 films that I really enjoyed.
You can do this too.
Give me 5 more, or at least give me 2, because I'm probably not going to watch all 5 right now.
Yeah, and I don't think this is a replacement for traditional Rexis, but it is interesting though to see. You can do embeddings that are like conditioned on descriptions or text or things like that. So I think these two worlds will collide a bit.
I think you're an outlier because of the cognitive load that takes. And even though for you, you're sitting there and you're like, no, this is really cool because I can be really creative and you can get a much better recommendation than just scrolling through the horizontal bars on Netflix. But then I was looking at it and I was saying, yeah, but man, clicking is so much easier than trying to articulate what movie. And really, I think that's what it comes down to is like, if I go on Netflix and I just scroll around for a while and it knows what I have watched already and it's already bringing me different films, then it's much easier to just go, yeah, all right, this looks good. However, I don't think I am that person either, because usually I'll get my movie recommendations from folks on TikTok.
Okay, interesting.
I'll see different people on TikTok break down like, here's the top 10 these movies, this insert like favorite type of movie. But for the most part, the recommender systems where you're just clicking or scrolling, if we're going to a recommender system, like TikTok's got the best one, right? And so if you extrapolate it out, maybe for a movie, yeah, but if it was for a social network like TikTok, I'm in the mood for something funny. It has to do with like cats and this and that, and it's going to be much more effort to get something where you can just get those signals and scroll.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. This isn't something I've given a great deal of thought to, although something that occurs to me just off the top of my head is that like one of the hard problems with like recommender systems is that you're like very often in a small data regime, right? Like new person joins and you know very little
that
about
cold
them.
start. Yeah.
And like being able to go from like a description of that person or like looking some stuff up about them and then using that to like find which people are like them might
Enticing.
be a very interesting way to overcome those cold starts.
That's a cool way of plugging it in. Yeah.
But not something I'm personally expert on, so I will avoid having too strong opinions.
Well, speaking of things you are expert on, as you look forward, what's around the corner for you?
So there's really two things.
Yeah.
And one of them we're launching actually, in the next week or two. So maybe by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be
Depending on my editing.
in at least in beta and sort of being used by people. But so one of them is we're trying to give much better support for people who are prototyping and building agents.
Nice.
And agent evaluations as well are just much harder than evaluating simpler systems.
Because of the steps involved?
Yeah, because there's like this branching tree of so many things that the agent can do. So having good coverage over what might the agent do is hard. Also, oftentimes to evaluate an agent or even run one, they're interacting with users or other systems. So you have to be able to mock those systems as part of your eval. So if there is a user who's asking questions as part of the agent, if one of the tools the agent has is like get information from user, then to run a good eval, you need to be able to like mock the user. Or if it's calling third-party APIs, like you need to have that integration into your eval system. So evaluating agents is just more complicated. And so we're launching a new agent builder, as well as much better tooling around how do I evaluate complicated agents. So today there's, I think, decent support for this in Humanloop, but this will just simplify both the DX and UX, and I think be pretty strong there. And then the one I'm very excited about is auto optimization. We're trying to come up with a better name for this, and maybe you can help me out with names. We haven't released this
auto
yet.
optimization.
But the premise is, people are spending so much time in Humanloop today, tweaking prompts, adjusting tool definitions, like iterating on these different components. And actually, we've done a bunch of research now in prototype on having AI systems do a lot of this iteration for you. And because we have access to your evaluation scores and your data sets, we can run that. So once you've set up basically your data set and evals, we can have the AI propose changes to prompts, update parts of the system, rerun the eval, look at the eval report, and then like a human data scientist would, like sort of think about like, oh, what is the cause of the failure, make an adjustment and rerun until the score improves to a certain point. That works better today than, like, we've benchmarked it against DSPY, we've benchmarked it against...
It has a bit of DSPy.
It's got a DSPy vibe to it. But one, we're looking at like entire pipelines, so not just kind of prompts or those parts.
Because they do the auto prompt optimization, but you're saying
the entire pipeline.
What if it's the model that you need to change out?
Yeah.
And so let's test 5 different models here and see if that gives us any extra lift.
So there's quite a lot of complexity to getting it to work well. And then we've benchmarked it against kind of the best things we can find in the academic literature, and we're currently outperforming. So we're going to sort of be running that in beta starting very soon, actually, with a sort of small group of early customers. And then I'm hoping in a few months or a couple of months' time, kind of launch that to GA. And so something that, our top users are spending 10 hours a week or something, of this iteration now. Wow. I think we can probably just automate all of that.
Wow. All of it?
A large fraction.
So it's basically like you're going to more of a declarative way of working. Just say, give me your evals and I'll give you what you need.
Give me your evals and that kind of first version of the system that works 80% accurate or whatever. Yeah. And a lot of the iteration that you were doing to get from there to the system that's 90% plus, all those hours that Brianna's team at Filevine spent in Humanloop with expensive lawyers, like we can maybe do a really good first cut of that, or at least automate a significant fraction of that work. So those two are the sort of new things that we're most excited about.
Lawyers are expensive. Engineers are expensive. PMs aren't cheap. And so,
especially good ones, especially in AI.
If you're thinking about, hey, these 10 hours now are opened up for the lawyer to be creating more evals.
Or just doing anything else.
Lawyer work, whatever lawyers do. Yeah. Go bill some hours.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be quite transformative. And I think that we have to build the foundations first. You can't actually, like, someone couldn't show up today and be like, hey, we want to build like the optimization system for AI products, because the first thing they'd have to do is like, they'd be like, okay, well, what we need is the ability to like build evals and run them over data sets and put that in the like closed loop of the optimization. I mean, people are doing it. So like Anthropic has some experimental APIs around prompt improvement. So if you go into
Yeah.
the Anthropic console, or if you
seen
go into
that.
their API, they'll like take a prompt and they'll rewrite that prompt for you, sort of using best practices for Claude. But it doesn't tell you anything about like how good, like, did it get better for your use case? And I think having this eval suite coupled to the auto optimization gives us a unique advantage over anyone else who's building in this space.
It sounds a bit magical, and so I want to see it when you release it. Like, come and show us, because the
I
idea.
would love to come back and, I mean, what we're going to try and do, the reason why we're launching it in beta first with small number of customers
Yeah.
is exactly this, that we know there will be skepticism
Uh-huh.
because the promise is so big.
Yeah.
And so what we would like to do is we want to launch it with like concrete case studies to kind of help people kind of get over that initial skepticism.
Yeah.
But I know from having used it in kind of our research work and having a very good intuitive sense of what people are trying to do,
Yeah.
I have very high confidence that this will work.
And so, are there things that, whether it is creating a more fine-tuned prompt or just having more prompts that you can pull from, or having more eval data points, does that add to the success rate, or is it like, whatever, give us that baseline and we'll add on to it with synthetic data, with some evals that we get, and we don't even need you around?
No, we like, the taste of the end user is not something that we can ever like replace. And they express what they want, right? You said moving to a declarative approach in
Yeah.
two ways, right? In the definition of the evals, in the feedback they give us, right? So one of the things that we can do is much the same way that we might, that the
Oh,
human teams today ask the domain expert for feedback in terms of score these outputs. That's something that we can ask for. And then the auto evals that are already there also guide it. So we cannot, like, there's no free lunch. We're not magically able to build a better system than
yeah.
you, like, without your input. But what we're changing is that, like, all we need from you, as you say, it's declarative, is like for you to express what you want clearly through like decisions on feedback. So like, yes, this one, not that one, preference data,
Yep.
definitions of evaluation, so minimum criteria of what good looks like, and a first version of the system from which we can infer your goal. And then from that, we can run.
So when you tell people about Humanloop, how do you describe it?
So we describe Humanloop as the LLM Eval platform for enterprises. And we're focused on evals because that tends to be the most foundational piece. It's not the only part of Humanloop, right? We're really trying to give you all the tools you need to do prompt management, to do observability, to do evaluation, to get a reliable AI system. And I think we're quickly becoming the kind of sort of industry standard for evals. So that's the bit we lead with, because I'd rather be, 100% clear and 80% accurate.